In the last few moments, we've just heard that Sir Keir Starmer has just finished co-chairing a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. The Prime Minister and the French President Emmanuel Macron leading that call today with other European leaders. We've heard from Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk saying that all those in the meeting confirmed the need for continuing support in Ukraine, waiting for the exact details of that discussion. But let's speak to Shashank Joshi, defence editor at The Economist. Good to have you with us. Appreciate you sharing your time. If I was to ask you to get your crystal ball out, we haven't yet had the readout. What should we expect to see, or what might we expect to see from the Coalition of the Willing in the next few moments?
I think what you're going to see is an effort to try to tie together two things. One of them is the momentum on the American side towards openness of some kind of guarantees with no real specificity as to what that means, and tying that into the European idea of a military deployment, a fairly modest military deployment in and over Ukraine, the Coalition of the Willing, and to try and put those things together, because essentially if Europeans are putting planes above Ukraine or boots on the ground, what they need is Donald Trump to promise he will first of all enable that deployment, so logistics, command, intelligence, all of those things. And second, what they need from him is a promise that if that force runs into trouble, that American muscle will stand behind it. And what's happened yesterday with this new American openness on guarantees is a way to try to make some progress on that question.
Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, made comments over the course of the weekend saying that Putin was on board with some concept of a security guarantee and elements to that effect. None of that was made public at the time in Alaska. Where do we get this sense that this has come from the Kremlin and from Moscow? Because it, in many respects, goes against the grain of everything they've been arguing, fighting and standing for the past 2-3 years now.
Yeah, you're right. So Donald Trump corroborated that view and said that Russians were willing to accept guarantees. But this is where the devil really is in the detail. We know the Kremlin has repeatedly and recently again ruled out any consent or acceptance of European forces inside Ukraine. That is a big no for them. So that raises the question, as you ask, what actually did they indicate to Trump? What have they accepted? And for me, as I said on your program yesterday, my great concern is that we are seeing a revival of ideas that were discussed between Russia and Ukraine back in 2022 in something called the Istanbul process, where Russia agreed there could be international security guarantees with a number of guarantor states, but that Russia would have a veto on whether those guarantees could be activated. So in other words, there was a guarantee mechanism, but there was also a Russian poison pill written into that agreement. And of course, if that's what's on the table, that will be wholly unacceptable to Ukraine and unacceptable to Europeans.
We're just getting a couple of breaking developments from an interview with CNBC, the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, saying he believes that there will be a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, and that his sense is that both sides are ready for the conflict to end. They're pretty big assumptions there, but it does seem as though there is certainly a move towards potentially a trilateral meeting. Certainly that's the sense we're getting from Trump, if nobody else.
My gut feeling is that Scott Bessent, in his position, has about as much access to internal workings of the White House as I do. So I'd be cautious of anything he says on that topic. But clearly, we saw yesterday's summitry concluding with a real sense of optimism from Donald Trump. And of course, there was that moment where he told Emmanuel Macron, caught on a hot mic, I think Putin wants to do a deal for me. I think that the challenge here for both Zelensky and Putin is to show Trump that they are being more reasonable than the other. And that impulse could propel them towards a meeting. But I think it would be very interesting because it would be quite a challenge for Putin to accept. He has repeatedly said Zelensky is a Nazi who leads an illegitimate regime in Kyiv, and Putin has tried to kill Zelensky. For him to meet him in person with Donald Trump there, to shake hands, to talk, would be to legitimize Volodymyr Zelensky. And I think that it's very interesting to see that European consensus saying a trilateral meeting, great idea, let's do it, because it puts the ball back in the Kremlin's court in a way that I think is quite challenging for Vladimir Putin to now accept, which is why he's being very ambivalent on that question in the last 12 hours or so.
You mentioned that it would be difficult for Putin to accept potentially a meeting with Zelensky. I kind of wonder, will Putin accept any of this? Because in the last 3 years, there's been somewhere around $300 billion worth of support from Europe and from the United States in all sorts of metrics, whether that's military or otherwise, to Ukraine. The reality is, in the last few days, Russia's still made advances on the battlefield. The war is in its third year. Why does Putin not just, I'm not advocating it, but why does he not, from his perspective, just carry on fighting?
I think your logic is impeccable, and I think that what he has asked for in Alaska, which is to be handed over at the negotiating table, what he cannot and has not been able to win on the battlefield, which is the remainder of Donetsk province, a very fortified part of the eastern Donbass region, that would potentially make a deal worthwhile, because why not take at the table what you can't get on the battlefield? But if the alternative is simply to freeze the lines, if he isn't being handed over unoccupied territory free of charge or with very minor reciprocal concessions, then I think the truth is he will absolutely want to fight on, particularly if a deal comes with, for him, unacceptable provisos such as European troops inside Ukraine, American guarantees for Ukraine, Zelensky stays on, which is why at the end of the day, when all is said and done, despite the momentum that we've seen, the cordial discussions yesterday, a peace agreement in Ukraine is still less likely than not.
Defence editor at The Economist, Shashank Joshi. Good to have you with us. Appreciate your thoughts as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.